r/AskReddit. Redditors who had arranged marriage. Was sex awkward initially? How did you break the ice? Male Muslim here. Sorry for wall of text. Married less than a week ago and want to share. D. Hopefully someone manages to see this. Like a lot of the stories here, I guess it was technically arranged but not really. It was a rainy day when my family and I went to go meet my now wife and family-in-law. It wasn't the bad kind of rainy though. The drizzle was light, the air was crisp, and even though there were clouds everywhere it felt kind of bright. When we were welcomed in and settled there were a few silly little things I noticed that actually perked me up a little. A Nintendo DS on their TV stand, books like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings and Redwall in the shelves, a DuckTales DVD sitting on top of the player, the smell of fresh baked chocolate chip cookies wafting from the kitchen. Of course this didn't necessarily mean anything as the items could have belonged to anyone else in the home, but they were all things that spoke to me, and unfortunately they are things that many Muslims I met never seem to be into. If they weren't things that the girl I was about to meet was into, then at least there was someone in this place that I had a connection with. We were seated for what couldn't have been more than a minute or two before her mother got up to get some refreshments and I guess check on her. My mom got up to help, but I'm pretty sure it was because there was a chance she could scope out my wife. In the middle of our idle chit chat with her brother and father I overheard her being introduced to my mother in the kitchen. My heart rate immediately went up because I knew she was going to be out soon and then all eyes would be on us. My mom was the first one to appear with a tray of South Asian sweets, then her mom with some appetizers, samosas and spring rolls if you're wondering, and finally her with a plate of cookies. She was beautiful. I was surprised my jaw didn't hit the floor when she walked through the door. I had to practically peel my eyes away from her. Obviously I wanted to show that I'm a good Muslim and tried not to look at her for longer than would be appropriate, but I found myself looking at her every chance I could because she's so beautiful. After being grilled a bit the conversation switches to her and I'm ecstatic because I get a break and I can stare at her. Then we start getting into hobbies, likes, dislikes, and personality traits. They ask what I like to do in my free time. My response is a little vague because lots of video games isn't something they likely wanted to hear, but I do mention video games. Her mom groans that we would be a good match since she always has her face buried in her DS these days. We dive more into our personal hobbies, and I bet I'm growing a dumb smile on my face because it's crazy how much we have in common. Her mom says something along the lines of how she still spends most of her time watching Disney and Nickelodeon. She gets a little annoyed and says that she doesn't spend all her time watching those channels. When I pipe in and mention that that's all I ever really watch as well aside from something like The Walking Dead, she smiles and turns towards me with a cute little half sheepish smile on her face and we make real eye contact for the first time. It felt like an eternity and a millisecond all at once. We break it off and I can feel the heat emanating from my face. I'll fast forward since this is getting a little long. We get married. Our first moment of intimacy was probably after the wedding festivities had died down and we didn't have to meet and greet a billion people. During our honeymoon we went to an outdoor ice skating rink. She had never been before, but I had, so I thought it might be fun for her to learn and me to teach. It's not very hard, and she got the hang of it pretty quickly, and we had a good time just skating with her holding onto my arm and chatting away. After a little bit we decide to sit on the benches at the side of the rink. I step away to get hot chocolates for us to sip while we relax. One of her friends had tipped me off beforehand that she really likes Christmas white peppermint drinks, so I made sure to get that and asked the guy to add extra whipped cream for her. I watched intently as she took her first sip and a smile drew across her face. I told her that I had heard that she really likes peppermint. She said that she did. I laughed and asked her if she also really likes whipped cream because it was all over her lips and nose. She giggled and rubbed her nose. I laughed and went back to people watching when she leaned over and kissed me on my cheek. I know a kiss on a cheek isn't much, but I absolutely melted and was a little speechless while she just giggled at the whipped cream on my cheek and said that it should be gone now. not one to miss a cliche opportunity. I'll let her know that she missed a spot and leaned in for our first kiss. It wasn't awkward, it wasn't strange, it was just an amazing moment. We might have had an arranged marriage, but we also had the time to develop into a relationship. As for the 6, http://i.imgur.com/offsquim.gif. Edit. I love you too. 3. Don't tell my wife. Edit 2. Should mention that I got to talk to my wife for quite some time before we got married. I have an amazing story regarding this, but I may be too late to the party. Warning. Wall of text. This all happened April last year, and it is 100% true. My wife is from a Muslim country originally, but her family is from the capital and quite modern. She has relatives however from a smaller village who are not quite as modern. So one of her second cousins, son of dad's cousin, wants to get married because it is time already and he wants children. His mom interviews a few girls, but it took a while. Some of the girls she didn't like because they weren't traditional enough, and some of the girls' families didn't want because the guy's family was too strict, even for a small village. Things like the girl having to be Muslim, must wear hijab, pray 5 times a day, the whole ordeal. Finally they find a girl who suits him, his mom approves, and girl's parents approve, so they organize the wedding for like 2 weeks after. Sadly because of that I couldn't go. We live in Western Europe and I need to tell my vacation days in advance, at least more than 2 weeks, but she could arrange it with her work to go for the wedding. My wife told me about the wedding. It was super traditional Muslim wedding, which I would have loved to see because I have never been to one, although it was hard for me to understand a wedding without any alcohol. So the wedding happens and it ends early and everyone goes home to rest and sleep. My wife and his family, parents, and sister go to the hotel which is an hour away. Then my wife's dad gets a call. I should say before that my wife's dad is very well considered in his extended family because he has a very good job in the center and works with high profile people. Basically a very respectable man. It was maybe 1 AM and he gets a call from his older sister saying that he needs to go back to the village immediately. There is an emergency. Him expecting it to be about money. He gets asked for money quite often. Demands to know what is going on. So here is fun part. The groom was a very traditional Muslim man. He had never had a date, never gone out with a girl, and followed his religion in a very strict way. He had barely talked to women in the past. The bride has followed a similar path. So they finish the ceremony, they go to the room, and they realize they have absolutely no idea how to proceed. Like these people did not know how to have sex. They had never watched a porn film, they never had sex education, no one thought to tell them what they would have to do in bed. They are there wondering what to do now, so they call this aunt who is the eldest of the family to tell them what to do. But the aunt feels that a woman cannot possibly describe to a man how to have sex. That is so inappropriate, so instead she calls her younger brother, my father-in-law. My Phil doesn't want to hear about that crap. He is 1 hour away, and it is really barely any of his business. It is late, and he works the next day. Also there must be many others more suitable for that kind of thing. At this point my wife and her mom and sister are cracking up, because they cannot believe this is happening on 2013, and the thing is no one expected this, otherwise they would have taken precautions. So my Phil tells them to try to find someone else, and if not he will go, but thankfully they contact one of the guests who is a mullah, not sure I spelled that right, like a religious figure, who agrees to go and explain to the guy what to do with his wife, so they can consummate the marriage. But it doesn't end there. Like a week later my wife comes and tells me that apparently something happened, because the next days the bride was seen walking funny, and apparently they had to contact a gynecologist, because something had happened during the wedding night that actually hurt the poor girl. We never got to know what was it that he did, or they tried, that went wrong, or the outcome after. Keep in mind this is really embarrassing for them, so they tried to keep it as low as possible. We only found out because they called my Phil first to try to go talk to the guy. So obviously this was in a very rural area in a small village of Muslim country, very hard to understand for many of us, but it is one of my favorite stories that I heard. I doubt this happens in many arranged marriages, but hey, it happened in at least once. And last year too. Warning, this reads like an erotic story written by a 9th grader. Indian American, born and raised in New York. Here, I had an arranged marriage to a girl in India at 29. I was getting fed up with the dating scene and told my dad that maybe getting married from India wouldn't be such a bad idea. He signed me up for a matrimonial site for Indians. I met my wife by chance on this thing while she was working in Dubai. I have dated a few people in my 20s and 2 of them got serious enough that marriage was being discussed when we split. I've dated girls casually as well as a FWB. Going in I thought I was well beyond puppy love and was convinced that arranged marriages were for convenience, security, and all the boring but comfortable things that my Indian parents gave as arguments for arranged marriage. She was extremely shy and spoke in a low tone for our first conversation. Her English isn't as good as mine, but I speak her language fluently, so we mainly communicated that way. Eventually this turned into Skyping for hours every day for 4 months. The topics we discussed were absolutely the most innocent things you could imagine. I mean absolutely nothing near sexual was discussed, but I felt like I was really connecting with someone like I hadn't before. I also found myself really excited at the prospect of meeting her. One of my previous relationships was 3 years, and I felt more honest and safe with this stranger in Dubai over the internet. I had a little anxiety attack the week before I flew out to India to meet her, but I convinced myself that I had no less than a 50/50 shot that this would turn out great for me and carried on. We met and I was floored with how pretty she was. I was used to seeing her sans makeup after her shift nurse over webcam. I was really happy with how pretty she is that way, so I was smiling ear to ear when I saw how absolutely stunning she looked in person, dressed up in a sari. We talked, I confirmed that I still felt the same way in person as over the internet, and I officially proposed that afternoon after a walk, followed by her older brother and wife at about 100 paces. We got married that Sunday. It was awesome, so much more awesome than I expected my wedding to be. We partied until 1 AM before winding it up and going back to our room. I knew we were both thinking about it, but no one said anything. She sat on one side of the bed nervously looking through her bag. I sat on the other side kind of wondering if I should just go over and put my hand on her boob or something. So I got up and did what I thought would be pretty clear sign. I took off my shoes and socks, took off my shirt, and went into the bathroom and ran the water. I stood there for about 5 minutes silently as I waited for her to follow. She didn't. I took a shower with the door slightly ajar, waiting for her to come in. She didn't. I stood behind that door at naked and tried to get her to come in by asking for a towel. She stuck her arm through the door, gave me the towel, and sat back down. My proud erection was a little confused. She was extremely innocent, but I don't think I could have been clearer without saying, "Come in here, I'd like you to see my penis." So I got dressed and sat on the bed next to her. She got up and went into the bathroom with a pile of clothes. I heard the latch slide over and a door chain being used. I sat through a long shower and watched her come out wearing cotton PJs with some stupid floral print on them. Not sexy sleepwear like I would have expected. She turned the lights off and sat next to me in silence under the covers. 5 minutes of silence before I decided to try tickling her side. She grabbed my hand and I felt her hold it, so I rolled over and planted one on her mouth. She kissed back like the first girl I ever kissed, awkward but excitedly. We made out like I haven't made out since probably high school. Extremely fumbly heavy petting from both sides eventually ended up in shirts and pants being taken off. We were both naked, but not doing anything yet. I eventually just took her hand as we were making out and put it on my dick. She held it like she was holding a flashlight while kissing me, so I was forced to reassess the situation and come up with an alternative plan. I took both of her hands and held them while I worked my way into position to go down on her. She had reacted when I started kissing her stomach, and this turned into "what the hell are you doing?" Once I started what I was down there to do, she was surprised but didn't stop me. She held onto my hands and repeated asking what I was doing several more times before putting her head back and really getting into it. She then had her first orgasm. Apparently they don't teach you that girls can do that in Indian nursing schools, and we lay there while I explained what just happened to her. After talking and her regaining composure, I rolled over and did my best to get it in. That didn't work, and I was too stupid to bring any lube with me from the US. Spit didn't work too well either, and she was in pain, so I stopped. She asked if I could have orgasms too, so I was obliged to show her that I was indeed able. She used her hands with some step-by-step coaching from me and was kind of dumbstruck by what happened. We cleaned up, kissed and laughed some more and fell asleep. After a few more painful attempts, we got that sucker in and have been banging like rabbits since. Throwaway here for some reasons that will become clear in a minute. I'll give a little background to how the whole thing came about to put having sex with my first cousin into context. Spoiler alert. My marriage was arranged-ish in that it was not love-based initially. So, I'm of Pakistani descent. I was born in the UK, as was my mum, but my dad is from Pakistan. He moved here when he married my mum at 22 years old, so generally speaking we, as a family, as quite British. Recently I finished my degree and I had been working for a couple of years, at which point my mum and dad asked me if I wanted to get married. In Pakistani culture it is not expect that your children go out and date or whatever. Standard practice is usually for parents of the children to discuss marriage plans on behalf of the children, and the level of involvement varies between cultures, ethnicity, religion, etc. Anyway, my mum said she had thought about the possibility of me marrying my cousin, I'm the dude in this scenario BTW, and asked me what I thought. I was initially pretty grossed out by it, but she asked me to mull over the decision for a while. A couple of months later my mum said that my aunt said that my cousin, now wife, is willing to chat to me about it if I am. Turns out she was actually playing me at this point, because my wife hadn't been told about this at all, but my aunt was potentially on board with the possibility, so she did this to get me to make up my mind quickly. Which I did, and I agreed to meet at some point. After all, she was hot. Yeah, I know that sounds gross to you. We met up and had the most awkward first date ever conceived in the history of mankind, where basically we discussed virtually every aspect of normal dating into one 3-hour dinner where we basically discussed our likes, point dislikes, what we find attractive in the other person, personality traits, etc. Like I said, super awkward. At the end of the dinner we had literally agreed to marry each other, which was the surrealist experience of my life. Afterwards I talked about it with my brother and sister, who had apparently known about this plan for me and her to marry before I did, and they've been poking fun of me ever since. One of the really weird things I found out about that dinner is that she is apparently super horny, which something pretty strange to find out about your cousin. And about 2 weeks after our engagement we had been talking a bit, and I sent her some semi-lewd innuendo texts which eventually blew into full-blown sexting. Yes, 2 weeks after I agreed to marry my cousin we were sexting on a regular basis. Also about this point I found out that she knows nothing about sex. Now we were both virgins, but the fact that she had never had an orgasm and wanted to give BJs with condoms on sounds weird to me, but hey. A couple of weeks later I sent her some non-explicit nude shots, and we trade back and forth. A couple of weeks after that she comes over to my house and we make out under the guise of going to the supermarket to get onions. At this point I would like to state how surprisingly cool my parents were with all of this. Going into this all I assumed, since we are all pretty religious, that we would be banned from seeing each other until the wedding or something. But we were allowed to act pretty freely, and it was implied that we knew we couldn't have sex. A little while later making out turns to groping/rubbing over other/underwear, and a little while later we were sending each other full-blown nude pics/videos. This would have been about 6 months after we were engaged. This continued on for another 6 months until we got married. The actual wedding night, the sex wasn't awkward Peresi. The actual act was like physically doing it after talking about it for almost a year. But in terms of breaking the ice or anything, we didn't have that problem because we were super horny for each other at this point. I'm going to use a throwaway for this. Well, I recently met 3 girls through parents. The first girl I met had already seen 8 boys. I was not sure whether boys were rejecting her or she was rejecting them. She was quite nervous, even though it was my first time in this setting. While I tried to relieve some awkwardness and was glad to see few giggles from her after I cracked some silly jokes, her sister-in-law barged in the room and started interviewing me. I was furious, but hey, can't tell her to piss off. I liked the girl though, but it seemed like she was under pressure from her parents. Apparently, her sister had a love marriage against the wishes of her parents and her father didn't talk to her sister for 5 years. I told my parents that before you finalize anything, make it bloody sure that girl's parents are not forcing her in any way. After that, didn't hear back from the girl's parents. I met the second girl over lunch with her father sitting 5 to 6 tables away from us. She kept complaining about the restaurant. For a tier 2 city, the restaurant was nice, and it was picked by her father. She also kept alluding to maintaining a standard of living. I'm not sure what that was about as I'm not filthy rich, but I earn well enough. Third one kept talking most of the time. She didn't want to marry for the next 2 to 3 years, but wanted to keep her options open. She liked shopping and sleeping. I was okay with shopping and mentioned that I don't mind accompanying her for 3 to 4 hours while she was shopping. But then she mentioned that she would prefer if I dropped her off in the morning and picked her up in the evening after the shopping was over. And after almost 2 hours over coffee, I realized that she didn't have any interests or hobbies other than that. She also mentioned that she has had proposals from boys, but wanted to get married according to her parents' wishes. I'm sure you might be curious why I don't go for love marriage then. Marriage in India is still a marriage of 2 families along with marriage of 2 persons, although that is changing rapidly. The good thing is that 5 to 10 years down the line, the arranged marriage market will become a lemons market. Market forces will rule. The second reason is that majority of this generation is in love with the idea of love marriage here. Girls don't want to move in together and see how it is to live with someone. They want to skip this step straight to marriage. And some of my friends are not happy when they realized that they don't want to live with that person on a daily basis. The search is on, and by this time next year I will have something to post here. Till then I will save this thread. And apologies for any grammatical mistakes. The amount of righteous indignation in this thread right now is great. Unfortunately, I can't keep my stupid mouth shut and find myself playing devil's advocate again. From a sociological/anthropological perspective, I can actually understand the roots of some of these customs. Having someone witness or hear the consummation sounds to me like a way of protecting the girl and her family. Otherwise, the new husband could come to the family the next day and say she wasn't a virgin, and it would be hard to prove if he was the one who took her virginity or not. Putting so much weight on virginity in the first place. Think about the guy in this situation. I know, Reddit hates looking at the Zai side. You just married a girl you only met a few times. Everything you know about her and her family is based on a few family references. You are basically putting a huge amount of faith and trust in her family. If they lied to you about her being a virgin, what else did they lie to you about? Especially in cultures where family ties and coalitions are so important, trust is a huge deal. More so, imagine that one of the very first things you learn about your new wife is that she isn't a virgin. You don't know her very well yet. A few thoughts are running through your head right now. Okay, yeah, it could have been a horse riding incident, but if she was the kind of girl I was told she wasn't the tomboy type. Certainly no girl in my culture was doing gymnastics. Is she promiscuous? That's not the kind of girl I want as a wife. She must be batshit crazy. In Western culture, premarital sex is normal. But in a culture where premarital sex is a huge taboo and totally against the rules, finding out that your new wife can't adhere to social norms and breaks the rules might be a deal breaker for you. If anyone, Western or not, found out on their wedding night that their partner was actually carrying around some huge skeleton/baggage, wouldn't it be a good enough reason to second guess the marriage? The number of stories where it worked out in this thread actually makes me happy. It anecdotally proves something that I've thought for a long time, that most young adults are too damn stupid to make decisions like that by themselves. In a world where you might only live until you're 40, you have to get married young. But chances are that, if you are dating for marriage, and not just to have a GF/BF, you shouldn't be making the decision just based on your own perceived genius on the subject of the opposite sex. Shouldn't all major life decisions be made with the advice of someone older and trusted? And for most people who know someone, boy or girl, as well or sometimes even better than they know themselves, the parents, of course. Having someone set you up on a date is like having someone recommend a good book to you. They already know what you like to read, already vetted the dime novels, and have now saved you the time of reading through 100 crappy books yourself to find the best. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.